My fiancée is covering up her sister's affair, so I exposed the whole thing. Part 4. The last time I wrote in, I ended it up with me assuming that my brother had used my office computer to chat with Amy, but it was too late for me to contact him. I am one of those guys that once a problem is put in front of him, I must be actively working on trying to solve it. This is great for my career choice, but in situations like this, all I was doing was driving myself insane. So, I decided to take a deep breath, leave everything until later and carry on with what I needed to do. The first thing up was attempting to contact every person from my side that I had invited to the wedding that I had not yet informed about its cancellation. As you may recall, I had already informed my parents and had them contact my relatives on the day I made up my mind, but only myself and Sarah have the complete guest list, so I needed to do the rest myself. Out of respect for my friends, I decided to call instead of text, but this might have been a bad idea since every phone call typically resulted in a rather lengthy explanation of why I was canceling the wedding. I know I could have given some other excuse, but I wanted people to know that I wasn't being frivolous or just experiencing something inane like cold feet. It was important, not just for my own reputation, but I think in order to show respect to the people who had agreed to come on that day to support myself and Sarah as a couple. Because of this, it wasn't until late into the evening that I finally managed to contact everyone, which meant it was now morning time in Australia. I knew what I needed to do, but I wanted to make sure that my ducks were all in a row, so I took a breather and made a sandwich in the kitchen. I noticed that Sarah wasn't home. I had no idea when she left and sat down to eat and think about what to do with my brother's situation. Let's call my brother Carl for the sake of shortness here. Now, Carl and I have always been pretty close despite him being 13 years older than me. He was this sort of quasi-parental figure in my life because by the time I became capable of having long-term memories, he was already well on his way to becoming an adult. He was always generous with his time, played with his little brother when other teenagers would probably have avoided such an activity like the plague, and generally seemed very mature and wise to me growing up. Suffice it to say, I respected him greatly. The idea that he had been spicy texting with a girl who wasn't his wife, in my house, was something that I was still coming to grips with and I needed to decide what to do. Talking to him about it was obvious, but at this point, given how much of a shambles my relationship with Sarah was, I didn't know if I cared about having him confess just for the sake of clearing my name. Was there anything to salvage anyway? I needed to, for my own sake of propriety, at least yell at him about this and convince him to stop. However, I wasn't sure if I was going to rat him out or not to my sill. Let's call her Karen. Alright, Carl and Karen at his guys. It all depended on what he told me and if I believed him or not. I finished my meal and logged into Facebook and video called Carl. Now, Carl works mostly from home as a remote office worker since his field is related to IT and he's almost always available during the day, and today was no exception. It didn't even ring more than once or twice before he answered. We greeted each other, exchanged some pleasantries, and then I just sort of dove into it and asked him if he had been using my computer to spicy text chat women on the internet when he was visiting me. Carl's face froze and he leaned over out of the frame of the camera. He was obviously closing his office door. Yeah, I did. Why? He said to me. I swore under my breath and explained to Carl how Sarah had thought that his flirting was me since he used my computer. I explained that I wasn't happy to take the hit for him and I asked him point blank if Karen knew about this or not. He waffled for a few seconds, stumbling over his words, and then looked a bit sheepish and said that no, Karen didn't know, and he'd prefer if it was kept that way. He went on to explain that their relationship had been pretty rough since their youngest was born 4 years ago, mainly in the bedroom department. Carl had always been a pretty private person, especially when it came to intimate details, or at least he had always been that way when talking to his much younger baby brother. However, this time he just let it all lay out. Things had been bad, he had been tired of getting rejected, Karen was always tired no matter what he did or how much he helped out around the house. Eventually, this led to problems on his side, some sort of performance anxiety on the few occasions where Karen would actually feel up for some bedroom fun, and things just got worse from there. Basically, he said, there is no amount of socks picked up, laundry folded, dishes washed, or time spent minding children that would get me laid. It was just not happening, so I started to spend time in my office at night working. He even did the finger quotes when saying this. Evidently his working at night turned into a pretty hardcore addiction to OnlyFans sites, which given the relative privacy he had in his office for legitimate work, spiraled out of control pretty quickly. I asked him if he was still doing it and he swore up and down that he wasn't. I thought I believed him when he said it. He seemed to be sincere. But I just had this niggling feeling in the back of my skull that something was off. Maybe it was because of all of the deceit I had encountered recently, but I was doubting my own brother who has really been a stand-up guy to me our entire lives together. I really hated being in this situation. Now, the problem I faced was pretty complex here. First, if I wanted to clear my name, then I would have to get my brother to tell Sarah that it was him all along. However, if he did that, then there was no guarantee that Sarah wouldn't spitefully inform Karen. I personally thought it would be best if Karen knew, but at the same time, I didn't know if I felt comfortable potentially dropping a nuke on my brother's marriage over something he not only said he stopped but is in this sort of moral gray area for me. I didn't have an answer right away as to what to do, but I did urge him to tell his wife about this and to get into marriage counseling. He said that they actually had been going for the last 6 months, and while it was helpful, what had really helped him was getting a prescription for some generic Viagra. I actually did a spit take at that, neatly spraying my computer screen with water. He told me that they had been trying to make sure they have intimate time at least a couple of times a week, and the Viagra had cured him of his performance anxiety to the point where now they were both looking forward to spending time together after the kids went to bed. The general gist of this was something along the lines of, "Hey, this is actually going in the right direction now, please don't screw this up for us. I really didn't want to be in this position, not just for the sake of Carl and Karen, but for my two nieces as well, and if what Carl was telling me was the truth, I could be tossing a firebomb into a relationship that was starting to mend." It was unpredictable what would happen, so yeah, it may disappoint some people, but at the time I felt that the best option I had was to wait and see. I was, after all, going to meet him in a couple of weeks in the flesh, and once I got him alone in a room and a few drinks into him, I was going to definitely get to the bottom of this. It seemed like the best course of action. Anyway, that night I went to bed early. I didn't see Sarah until the next morning. She looked haggard, like she had a distinct lack of sleep. I asked her where she had been, mostly out of habit. After all, we had been together for almost 6 years. She told me that she had gone down to the courthouse for Evelyn's arraignment to post bail. The courts here close at 1 p.m. on the weekends, which is why she had disappeared soon after I went into my office. She had driven her to her parents' house and spent the night. She made a point of telling me how horrible it was to have to explain to her parents that I had called off the wedding. I asked her if her parents knew the reason why, and she barked, "Of course they do." I tried to remain calm, but by this point in this ordeal, I was losing it. I bit back at her, "Are you going to move back there so that they have both girls at home now?" It was childish and petty, but the fact that she bailed Evelyn out of jail annoyed me to no end. "You don't need to be an ass about this," she said, to which I said, "And you don't need to be Evelyn's underling." I could see Sarah visibly flinch when I said that to her. It obviously had struck a chord, and the corners of her eyes started to tear up, and I cooled my temper. We just sort of stood there, miles apart in the living room of our house, and didn't say anything for a good solid minute or two until Sarah decided to continue talking. "Our parents are going to be here at 3. I actually face-palmed at this. I was about to go off on her for not consulting me on this, but decided that was just my own ego. After all, I did need to sit down with them and work out the details around the wedding and whatever remaining deposit we had, and I needed to, at least once, face-to-face explain to everyone why it wasn't happening. So fine, let's do this and get it out of the way. I tried to make myself busy, but there isn't much you can do on a Sunday except waste time, and time wasting isn't very enjoyable when you know you are heading into the meat grinder in just a few hours. Still, 3 p.m. came, and so did our parents. We all sat down at the large kitchen table that Sarah had bought just a month after we closed on the house. It was second-hand, from the Facebook marketplace, but she loved it because it was solid oak with a beautiful finish and capable of seating 8, and just as heavy as that sounds. She always wanted to have big dinner parties with our families over, just not like this. The next 3 hours were grueling.